Thank you for coming to tonight's event. I am Jennifer Davidson, Dean and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Graduate Theological Union and John Dillenberger Professor of Theology. And it is my privilege to welcome you to our 47th Annual Distinguished Faculty Lecture featuring Dr. Richard Payne. I am so pleased by the size of our audience tonight from far and near. On behalf of those who are near at the GTU's Berkeley campus, I want to acknowledge that we stand on the ancestral land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We recognize the indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land, and we affirm the enduring relationship that exists between indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. To outline the plan for this evening, in a moment, I will introduce to you the Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto, who will in turn introduce our speakers this evening. Then Dr. Richard Payne will present this evening's lecture, followed by a response by Dr. Courtney Bruntz. Our evening will conclude with some closing remarks from Dr. Payne. If you would like to use closed captions, please click on the closed caption button on the bottom of your screen. So let us begin. Some of you who are new to the GTU may wonder, what is the Distinguished Faculty Lecture? Always a highlight in the GTU consortial calendar, this lecture gives us a chance to honor a member of the GTU faculty whose scholarship exemplifies the kind of faith-filled wisdom that we value and hope to nourish for the sake of our communities and the wider society. Nominations for Distinguished Faculty Lecturer come from the faculties of the member schools and the rostered faculty of the GTU, who are invited to nominate one person from any GTU school except their own. The Council of Deans then reviews the nominations and makes the final selection. What this means is that the consortial faculty chooses one person each year whose scholarship they respect enough to set forth as representative of the highest standards of this ecumenical, interreligious, and interdisciplinary community of scholars. Dr. David Matsumoto will introduce to you this year's Distinguished Faculty Lecturer. Dr. Matsumoto is the President and Vice President of Academic Affairs at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, a member school of the Graduate Theological Union. He is also the Director of the Center for Contemporary Shin Buddhist Studies and past resident minister of the Berkeley Buddhist Temple. Dr. Matsumoto, thank you for being here this evening. I invite you now to introduce our respondent and our distinguished faculty lecturer.
Thank you, Dean Davidson. I'm very honored to be able to introduce to you Dr. Richard K. Payne, who present the 47th Annual GTU Distinguished Faculty Lecture this evening. Dr. Richard Payne is the Eihanu Mata Professor of Japanese Buddhist Studies at the Institute of Buddhist Studies. He's also a longtime colleague, mentor, and friend. Dr. Payne earned a PhD in History and Phenomenology of Religion from GTU. During his dissertation research into Homa tantric fire ritual on Mount Koya in Japan, he also completed training as an ajari, or Shingon priest. Dr. Payne has had a very distinguished scholarly career. Active in the field of Japanese Buddhist studies, his core research program on tantric ritual has been undertaken within a broader theoretical concern about the way in which such research and Buddhist research in general is conducted. As a result, he's engaged extensively in the study of ritual across cultural boundaries and over long durations, examining in particular the use of language in tantric Buddhist ritual. His study of Buddhist ritual has also brought him to examinations of Buddhist psychological traditions, with a focus on the Mahayana Samgraha, a comprehensive work on the central doctrines and practices of the Yogacara Buddhist school. At IBS, he has taught courses in the psychological aspects of Buddhism, the foundations in Buddhist psychological thought, methods in the study of Buddhism, terms, texts, and translations, and esoteric Buddhism. Dr. Payne's writings are voluminous. His publications include his work, Language in the Buddhist Tantra of Japan, Indic Roots of Mantra, and numerous other scholarly texts, articles, and essays. His editorial work has been considerable over the course of some 3 decades. He's currently the editor of the Oxford Bibliographies Buddhism and co-editor with Georgios Halkias in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia Religion Buddhism. He has also been the editor of numerous significant volumes, including Revisioning Kamakura Buddhism, How Much is Enough? Buddhism, Consumerism, and the Human Environment, Homa Variations, the Study of Ritual Across the Longue Durée, along with Michael Witzel, Approaching the Land of Bliss, Religious Praxis in the Cult of Amitabha, with Kenneth Tanaka, Pure Lands in Asian Texts and Contexts, an Anthology, with Giorgio Halkias, Secularizing Buddhism, New Perspectives on a Dynamic Tradition, and Buddhism Under Capitalism, with Fabio Rambelli. Dr. Payne has long served as editor-in-chief of the IBS annual journal Pacific World, and is the principal editor of the Pure Land Buddhist Studies series and Contemporary Issues in Buddhist Studies series. He's also the director of the IBS Buddhism and Contemporary Psychology Certificate Program. Moreover, Dr. Richard Payne served as the Dean of the Institute of Buddhist Studies for over 25 years. During his tenure, he essentially carried out the responsibilities of not only academic dean, but also president, budget director, head of HR, and IBS ambassador, as well as mentor to many aspiring scholars and practitioners. We in the IBS community are extremely grateful to Dr. Richard Payne for his long-standing leadership, encouragement, and inspiration. I am honored and extremely proud to be able to introduce him this evening as he presents the 47th annual GTU Distinguished Faculty Lecture entitled From Ritual to Religion, the Consequences of Taking Non-Dualism Seriously. Responding to Dr. Payne's lecture will be Dr. Courtney Bruntz. I'm honored to introduce her to you as well. Dr. Bruntz completed her PhD in Buddhist Studies from the GTU in 2014. She studied under Dr. Payne and Dr. Judith Burling, and her emphasis was on Buddhist revivalism and pilgrimage in contemporary China. She has since continued studying contemporary Buddhist practice, and her work investigates intersections of Buddhism, ritual, and economics. She recently published an edited volume called Buddhist Tourism in Asia, and at present she serves as Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences at Southeast Community College in Lincoln, Nebraska, where she additionally teaches courses on religion, philosophy, and Asian history. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Bruntz as this evening's respondent. Thank you very much.
My thanks to my friends and colleagues here at the GTU. This is a singular opportunity to express my appreciation to the entire GTU community, to name every individual to whom I owe a debt of gratitude after almost 4.5 decades of life at the GTU would run through the entirety of the time we have available to us this evening. Let me express in summary then my gratitude to the deans and other administrators who have kept this ship of scholarship afloat and headed toward new horizons. To my teachers and my faculty colleagues over the last 3 decades, including those with whom I have co-taught classes, and especially to the GTU and IBS students from whom I've learned so much. To the faculty, staff, students, and Board of Trustees of the Institute of Buddhist Studies, my institutional home for suddenly now over 30 years. To Dean and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Jennifer Davidson, for hosting this event. To Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto for his kind introduction and for the opportunity to collaborate with him for a quarter of a century. To Sabrina Kennedy for her work coordinating this event, and to Dr. Courtney Bruntz, once a student, now a colleague, for agreeing to give a response this evening. Like many Buddhist scholars, my interest in Buddhism began with practice. While exploring many different kinds of Buddhist practices, I became interested in the role of ritual, not simply as a part of Buddhist practice, but as key to practice as such. From there to realizing that ritual is not a unique category of activity, but rather a way of doing things. What has been called ritualizing. The same is true of doctrine, though unfortunately no one has come up with a neat equivalent term, and doctrinizing has a really funny sound to it. Let me switch then to sharing screen and start here. Okay. So this lecture is organized into 2 parts. The first is a critical part in which prevalent understandings of the relation between doctrine and practice are examined, and second, a constructive part in which a proposal regarding an alternative way of thinking about that relation is made. I think it is fair to say that since the inception in the latter part of the 19th century, both religious studies and Buddhist studies have given much greater attention to what people are supposed to think, that is, to doctrine, than to what people do, that is, practice. But for religion as a living reality, what people think and what they do are both included.